Hello there and welcome to another Hero Arts video. It's Michelle Short here and today I'm creating an easy mass-producible holiday card using the Christmas Lights Border Fancy die. So I'm going to start off by stamping my sentiment onto a panel of Lapis cardstock. The sentiment here is from the Comfort and Joy Messages set and I really loved this sentiment here. So I'm going to stamp that down onto the cardstock using the Mini Misty. And I'm just going to prep the cardstock with an anti-static powder tool. Just remove any of the excess powder and then I can ink up the stamp using clear embossing and Watermark ink. So I'm just going to ink that up really well and stamp that down. My ink pad is a little bit dry, it does need some re-inking, so I ended up stamping this twice, but ordinarily this ink pad is really nice and juicy, so you would just need to stamp it the once. But like I said, mine needs re-inking, so I'm just going to stamp it twice. And then I'm going to heat emboss that with some white detail embossing powder, and then I can heat set that until it's completely melted. Ordinarily, I don't generally mass produce cards. I do really admire those who can, but for the most part I do just create kind of like one-off cards. But where I find it really helpful to be able to mass produce is at Christmas time or the holiday time, just because I'm sending out so many cards. So I tend to pick a couple of different designs and then mass produce each of those. So then I've still got a few different designs to send out, but each of them I'm mass producing. So I'm going to take some ink here. This is the Blue Hawaii Reactive ink and I'm blending that around the outside of this panel. I want to create a kind of sort of like a bit of a highlight in the middle and then it be dark around the outside. Because I'm adding those Christmas lights, I want it to look like the lights are kind of lighting up the inside of the panel, if that makes sense. So that's that Blue Hawaii ink, and then I'm going in here with the navy mid-tone ink, and I'm just using an ink blending tool here rather than a brush, just because I want a bit of a darker application. So I'm just going around all of the edges of the panel here. And then I do go back in with the brush just to make sure that I'm blending that out. And what's helpful using the blue cardstock to start with is that you don't have to do so much ink blending. So I'm just using a dry cloth there just to wipe away any excess ink that was on the embossing powder. And then I'm taking some of the white Glimmer metallic ink and I've added that onto an acrylic block. And then I'm just picking that up with a paintbrush and then I'm going to splatter that over the panel. Originally I thought that I was going to mask off the sentiment, but to be honest with you I completely forgot when it came to this time of doing it. But because the ink is white and the embossing powder is white, it wasn't too bad, and for the most part I did manage to miss the embossing powder, but I am going to just go over it a little bit later on in the video. So just tapping that on, and then here I have cut the Christmas Lights Border Fancy die, and I have cut that from some white cardstock, and I added adhesive sheet onto the back of the cardstock before I cut that with the die cutting machine, and that just makes it easier so that I don't have to add loads of glue onto the back of it, and I can just remove the backing paper from the die. So here I was just working out, making sure that it's going to fit on the card and that the sentiment was in the middle okay, and then I can just remove that backing paper from the die and then stick that down. Quite often when using die cuts, especially if I'm just cutting them from white cardstock, I do like to layer them up, so maybe I'll do 3 and layer them on top of each other to give some dimension. But for mass producing cards I prefer just to have the one layer, and I still think it does make quite a big impact on top of that blue cardstock. But you could definitely add lots of layers if you wanted to. I was just trying to save a little bit of time if I'm going to mass produce this card. Great thing with sticker adhesive sheet is that you can move it around if you aren't happy with it. Once you're happy you can press down with something hard like a bone folder, and then I'm just cutting down that panel to be the correct size, adding some adhesive onto the back of that and adding that onto a top folding A2 sized white card base. I didn't get a perfect impression with the white embossing powder, so I'm just going over the thicker words there with a white gel pen. I find that when I'm embossing with a sentiment that has smaller kind of writing and larger writing, that I tend to go with the smaller embossing powder, like the detail one, because I find it works better on the smaller sentiments. But then for the larger sentiments, sometimes it does skip a little bit. So I just like to go over that with a white gel pen just to brighten that up. And then here I'm just embellishing the card with some iridescent bubbles, just using some precision glue there just to stick those down. And that's the card finished for today. I think it would be pretty easy to mass produce if you did everything assembly line style. So you'd do all the stamping first, then the ink blending, then the splattering, for example. I hope you've enjoyed watching today. Links to the products that I used will be in the description bar on YouTube and also over on the Hero Arts blog. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.